Hello everyone and welcome to Handmade Hero, Shore We Code Complete game live on stream. If I remember correctly, and it's been about 3 weeks, so we took a break there. I was away. Uh, I want to start something new. I'm pretty sure we left ourselves in a reasonable position for starting something new. And we have a number of things we can do. However, I think there's a pretty clear order in which we should do them, so I'm going to say that order now. Out of the things that I want to do is, one, I want the tag system to get cleaned up. Now that we've got all this art assets in there, I want to simplify how we're doing tag querying and make it clear how things are selected from the art asset stream in like a clean, efficient manner. So that's one thing that I'd like to do. I would like to make it so that we can have ground cover and stuff now. So like when we, in fact, we sort of did a crappy example of this in the standalone renderer test that we have. We splatted some grass on things. I'd like to make a good version of that so that when we're outdoors, we can get those, like, some ground cover there. And possibly also indoors, we may want sort of a relatively generic scattering thing that's just like, scatter this crap around at this density, and then we can just use low density scattering for interiors to put things like rocks on dungeon floors or like debris, stuff where the placement of it doesn't really matter. It's just there for a visual effect. So it's not really necessarily there for gameplay where you don't interact with these things. They're just kind of giving you a little bit more texture of the environment. So we want to be able to do that. We want to finish up our lighting. So our lighting is still not really finished. It's kind of a little bit of zygote. I think I pretty much know how I want to finish it up now, so that it'll be fast enough to be shippable quality and also broad enough to be good, and usable everywhere. Finally, I want to get our world generating something reasonable for the actual layout of the game currently, which is to say that if you load the game at the moment, and I can sort of show you what I mean by this, if we go ahead and do a quick build here, and I launch Remedy with our game. So if you take a look at what it looks like at the moment, right, we end up in a situation where it's generating sort of the rooms, like our test rooms are generating there. But what we don't get is filler for areas like outside of the rooms. And we would like that to occur. So in other words, when even right here, where we're at the boundary here, I would like there to be outdoor tiles around here, right? So just, I want it to, I don't want there to ever be like dead space like that. Unless we're underground. And then like over here, for example, when we're in like a forest area or something like that, I don't want you to be able to see dead space. Like, so there should just be like trees out here, or just arbitrary forest fill, to go far enough out such that, like, if the player stands as far away as they can from the center of the area, whatever the region is they could plausibly have seen to is filled with stuff, right? So it's sort of just creating an apron of entities anywhere we like didn't put something normally. And, that's sort of just a way of solidifying the world a little bit so that you're not, so it doesn't look like, it's just part of getting things to the point where they don't look like a development build anymore, is like, we've got to like solidify a bunch of stuff, and that's like one of them, right? So those are the things that we would like to do. And I think the one that makes the most sense at first is the last one I said. Meaning, we should go in and get the generator generating something that's a plausible actual world here, meaning like this is kind of the number of entities that we expect to have. And we can also maybe force some more furniture in here. I don't know, we'll see how we want to do that. But we can sort of play around with that stuff a little bit more as we go. Anyway, so I would like to do that, and what we'll do down here, I'm not like 100% sure, to be completely honest with you. In other words, I don't know what is the right thing to show when you're down in a dungeon area. So there isn't a world outside. It would just be like rock, underground, like the earth, So most of the time it doesn't really matter because, as you can see, we've set the camera properly so that you only really see the room that you're currently in. But like, yeah, on these scrolling ones, when you can scroll to the side, I don't know. One thing we could do is stop the scrolling so that it doesn't, allow you to go further. But it's still, no matter what we do, there's still going to be this kind of thing happening at some point, probably. And so the question is just, what do we want to do there? And I don't know, it may be that we just want that to just be black. So in other words, we will clear any of the undrawn region, we'll clear that to black, and that is what it will look like, right? So that's what I'd like to do, and I just want that because in the upstairs areas where you're sort of want it to feel like it's outdoors, that's the kind of thing where I don't really want, I don't want black in the exterior there because it makes it feel like it's not really the outdoors, because, the outdoors wouldn't, we all know there's stuff here. So I'd like to have, that working correctly. So I think that's the first thing I'd like to start with, is just getting like aprons generated for everything, so that anywhere that we don't end up placing like actual world stuff on the, the sort of Earth's crust layer, for lack of a better term. Anywhere on that layer, I would like it so that we have a sufficient apron of entities to prevent you from seeing sort of the edge of the world. And at first here, I don't care if there's anything particularly nice about them. I just want squares there. And when we can work later on as we, improve our world gen code, to put, more intelligent layouts of trees and things. I mean, obviously right now we're not even doing like these trees that are in the apron right here. That are in the boundary right here. We were testing to see all the different kinds of trees that were in our pack. So obviously, like, at some point we have to make a thing that's intelligent about tree placement, because obviously these trees should not be occurring together. The trees should be sort of logically grouped. So, if this is a snowy area, we have mostly snowy trees. And if this is a fall sort of season area, we get most of the fall trees or things like that. So that's all fine and dandy. At the moment, I don't really care about that part for the apron. I just want to make sure that we're generating stuff in that apron. So when we look at how the world gen works, what we end up with is essentially, we end up in the room gen code, which is just kind of a placeholder right now because we don't really generate any gameplay rooms. But this is where the action will happen eventually for creating what, for lack of a better term, would be like one gameplay experience for the player, right? Because each room would have something like a monster you have to fight, or something you want to see, or a shop that you engage with. So pretty much anything gameplay related, right, is going to be a pretty complex set of things we're going to do in here to put down various gameplay things that we want the player to experience. And so this generate room function is where we're going to do that work. For generating the apron, I don't think we really want to confuse or conflate the two. So I think we kind of want a separate kind of function that's going to, generate apron areas, and it will just kind of like splat down things that's necessary to fill those areas. So the first thing I think we need to do is figure out when to call that function and with what amount of room, right? So if we go to our world gen code base, what we can see, our code base, that's good, our it's not like code base, our room gen structures, our room gen infrastructure. What we could see is we create sort of this intermediate representation where we have things like rooms, and the rooms are connected together, and we do stuff like place the rooms down, and then we, when we know where they all go, we then fill them in with stuff, and that's sort of how the passes of room generation goes. So what I want to be able to do is I would like, anytime we place a room down, to essentially say, in addition to this room, I need like an apron area that's going to fill all of the surrounding area of the room, and here's some information about like what that apron should be, right? But I don't want that to create any placement constraints, right? Because that apron is just filler. It's not required to be where it is. It's just saying if nothing else needed to go here, then we want to fill it in with trees or rocks or who cares what, cliffside, whatever it is. So what we want to do there is we want to be able to create these aprons as sort of a secondary thing that's like, here's where all the aprons would go. And then after the entire world has been like constructed and we know where everything goes, then we can sort of do a separate pass, if you will, to see where these aprons should fill in, and we just look and say, is there anything there? If there's not something there, then we place it. But if there was, we don't touch it. So that's what I want to do now. Since we know that the only things that can really exist at the moment are rooms, it seems like what we could probably do is say, well, there's a gen volume here for the room that says this is where the room is. It seems pretty straightforward that we could also just create a gen volume for the apron, right? So what we could do is say, well, maybe there's a gen apron, and the apron is just like sort of anything that's around the play area that the player doesn't go into, but that's there for visual effect, and it needs to be filled with something, and off we go, right? And so the gen apron would say, for this volume, I want to fill it up with something, and we can have some kind of a specification for what that is. We can probably follow what we were doing here, where we've got sort of a gen room spec. We can probably say, hey, maybe we've got a gen apron spec as well, and that just has who knows what in it. And so we're basically going to do the same thing here. Then what we can do is say, okay, these aprons just kind of stack up like everything else does. The spec, I don't know. We're just going to throw something in there that has nothing to do, right? And this is similar to do. It's like we don't really spec stuff at the moment. It's just placeholder. But what we want to do is have a list of these aprons so that afterwards we can go through and just load them up, see if there's any need to fill them with something, and if there is, fill them. If there isn't, don't. So there's a couple different, ways in which we're probably going to have to make this more robust than the first thing I'm going to do. But we'll kind of do a basic pass on it first. All right. So if we take a look at the gen world, which should be here somewhere. No? Where's the stuff that actually holds this stuff? Where did we put it? Right, there's a world generator, but I don't know where that ended up. Oh, it was in here. Okay, interesting. It's at the top. Well, I put it at the top for some reason. Why did I put it at the top? Nobody knows. So let's go ahead and create the gen apron sort of list here that's effectively going to be exactly the same as our rooms. And we'll just keep a separate list of these, and we know we sort of go sort of fill these out as a separate pass, right? And then inside here, we've got sort of our code to, well, no, that's not what I wanted. I wanted to look for our room code where we actually put one of these on here. So I think this is, no, that's not it. Where is our function? It's been a while. Where is our function for doing this? That's the room stack that we use for processing. Also not the same. Surely there's a way that generates a room into the system. And who knows where that is? Am I just not seeing it? Am I being daft here? I mean, right, there should have been, there should be, I would think, a function that gives you one of these. Right, a gen room. I have no idea why I don't see it here. I guess what I'll do is I'm going to look for where we add room connections here. I wanted to see where that actually exists. Just so I can figure out what on earth we were doing there to make these things. I could also look at the place where we create the orphanage and just see what we're calling, but that's just weird. So here's where we create our specs. Gen room. Ah, I see. So we sort of defined this as a macro so that we could produce labeling for it, right? You can see that happening here, so that we could see what our room layouts were. So that's why I didn't see it. Interesting. All right. Anyway, because yeah, you can see my little sort of crappy parser that tries to find all the functions. It doesn't work, I don't think, through like if there's like macros, you know, wrapping it. So it wouldn't find it would find this, but it wouldn't find that. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, so in here we've got our gen room call, and you can see that it's, you know, effectively just pushing on a struct onto this linked list of structs. That's what we want to do with the apron as well. So we just want to have a gen apron call here where we're basically pushing on, and you know, we maybe want to do the same thing where we push a label on there to see who's creating it, but you know, I don't know. I'm gonna wait till I actually need that before I go full pull on that. But anyway, we're gonna say, all right, you're gonna give us the world generator, and we're gonna push one of these guys on here. So it's the exact same code, really. Only we're, you know, not gonna set. We're gonna put it on a different list. That's about it. So here's the apron. We push one onto the memory for the generator. We say that the spec you gave us is the spec we will use, unsurprisingly. We set the global next to be whatever the first apron was in the list, and then we say that the first apron in the list is ourselves, right? It's a standard thing that we do for linked lists, nothing special. And so now we have a way of putting these aprons on. Don't ask me why I misspelled that. That's what we want. So we can do a gen apron call, and that puts one into the generator for future use. And what we need now is anytime we're actually making rooms, we want some way of making those aprons occur with them. And I'm not sure exactly how we want to do that, because if we look back at the code, so let's look at the orphanage code, since that's the thing that we actually have the most experience with here. So if you look at what's happening here when we're generating rooms, what you can see is that, you know, there's really not a lot of code that really thinks about the room's location after that. But, you know, we do like connection calls, like so. And the problem we're going to have here is, you know, we don't really want to we don't want to force ourselves to have to keep saying like, hey, generate the apron for this or the apron for that. And so I think maybe what we would want to do, just looking at this, is say, hey, maybe we want to talk about the act of generating the room itself could generate the apron based off of the spec. right? So for example, what we could do is say, all right, when you generate a room here, and yeah, maybe this is nice. I kind of like this idea. Maybe do it a little bit differently. So instead of generating the aprons right away, maybe what we do instead is say, okay, the gen room spec has an apron spec off of it. So when you generate the room, you will push the apron on with that volume, right? And so in other words, rather than calling this sort of thing manually, maybe what we actually do is we say, well, we've got the apron, and we know that when we're generating rooms, what we should do is the room spec, which says what kind of room this is, can also tell us if there is an apron, right? So we could just say, all right, you know, if you set this value to something, then when we generate the room, we know that we have to generate an apron that corresponds to that room, right? I like that idea because now we can sort of turn the process around a little bit and say, back in the code where we have the room gen, where we call this generate room call, what we could say is at that point. So, you know, we go through all of this stuff to create, you know, everything that's in the room. At that point, when we're at the very end and we've finished everything up, maybe that is the time when we then say, hey, whatever the room spec is, so because, you know, we've gotten the room spec here that we use to generate the room. Whatever the room spec is, we could say, if this spec has an apron requirement, then let's go ahead and use that apron requirement. So here's where we'll call gen apron, and we'll say, give me one of these, and the apron itself, we can set the volume now, and maybe we'll set no, I guess we wouldn't have to because everything else is set. So this gen apron that we get back, we know that the spec contains the information necessary, and that was sort of part of whatever the room specification was. And then in this part here where we do the apron volume, we know what the room volume is. And so all we have to do is look and see whether we think that volume should get applied to the apron. And the reason I say that is because we may want to not apply the apron to anything other than just the Z area, that one Z plane that we know we're using for aprons, right? I'm just not sure exactly how we want to do that. So for now, I'm going to ignore just that part, and we'll kind of come back to that a little bit later. But here's the room volume. So if I say that I want the apron volume to be this, well, it wouldn't really do anything because that's just only the area that contains the room itself. So what I need to do here is grow that by however many tiles I want aprons to be, generally speaking. And I believe that we have... Where is our gen math? There it is. I believe that we have a thing in here. Yeah, I do. So we've got a bunch of functions in here, and it looks like we already wrote the one we would need. This one allows us to take any volume that we have and add some amount of expansion to it, right? So if I want to take one of these Gen V3s, I can sort of say, all right, I don't want to add any Z to it, but I do want to add some X and Y. I don't know how many of those I want, but let's say we do an 8x8 apron around everything, and off we go. Okay? So now, in theory, anyway, if I take care of any bugs that we've got here, what is the problem? World gen. That is what I actually wanted. And this is vol, probably. And is that not a... Oh. And so that's really all we're talking about here. And I believe that that should just leave things exactly as they were. And now we should have, in theory, the ability to create something that, produces aprons, and we can make a call for that. So what I want essentially is a call like generate apron, and I want it to, do something pretty much the same as this, only, it's going to be given an apron rather than a room. And what I primarily need is the ability to just make sure that there's nothing there, right? There's nothing in the way. And so I think, looking at this, I need ways of finding if there's any entities in a particular location, and I don't really think we've done much of that yet. Obviously, we can get traversables by location, but that's not quite the same thing. And so we do need some way of getting entities that are nearby and making sure that we don't place anything in locations where they would be. So we might have to add a little bit of that. I think that's mostly the only thing that we're going to need, other than what we already have, right? And so, yeah. Let's go ahead and start with this, because we are going to iterate over the stuff here. So when we're generating the apron here, what we want to do is say, all right, here's our apron spec, which we don't really know what we're going to do with yet, but someday we'll probably do something with it. And then what we want to do is this same thing where we're taking the counts and we're just going to loop over them. Again, the Z index we're not really going to use, because in an apron we'll probably never use it, because we're just doing the bottom sort of level of it. And so what we want to do there is we want to place onto these tile indices, we want to go ahead and create entities here, like so. And we want to probably do just very basic, yeah, we want like a sort of a very basic cube for the wall here. Basically the exact same stuff we were doing. Well, they're not really going to be wall, but they're going to be ground. And that's mostly it, right? So we really just want something very simple here. Nothing too fancy. Something like this, right? I think that's all we really need. The wall height can, for the moment, really not be a thing. I mean, I don't know what we're going to put here. I don't really care. We'll think about this a little bit later. Ooh, I see what we were doing. We were trying to keep the placement consistent. So just doing something like that seems fine. We put one of these blocks here. We probably should put some tags on it to control what it's going to be, like whether it's outdoors or not. It would be this sort of thing, right? And so I think we probably just want to do something like this for now. And so that would place like cubes out there. And really the only thing that we need is a way to make sure that we don't place anything into areas that already had something placed. You know what I'm saying? Something that basically says, is there anything at this tile location? Because if the game had already generated room information there, I don't want to place anything there, like on top of it, right? So looking at get sim space traversable, which is the only query we have, the reason we don't really want to do that, right, is because we don't only want to look for things that are traversable, right? We want to well, actually, and I guess we'll, yeah, I guess even think about this. This is just using the grid, so even that we don't have right now. Like, we don't have the grid available. So really what we need here is we need sort of a way of querying what entities are in this particular location. And we really don't have that. Like, you can see that there really isn't anything there really isn't anything of that form. And so that's something that we need anyway. I mean, we need to be able to gather the entities that are in an area, and that's something that the sim region wants to be able to do. So it's not really an issue. So we should be fine, but we have to actually do it. So we'll do that. Yeah, we don't have anything in here for that as far as I can tell. I mean, here's the thing where we loop over all the entities and look for something, right? And that's already something that we had it to do in there, like, hey, we've got to make this thing faster anyway. And here's like another example, right? So all of this stuff is examples of things that we wanted spatial queries for anyway. And so we want to add those in here, and this is a fine reason to do it, because we need it for all sorts of things. And this is just one of the things that we'll want to be able to do faster spatial queries on. All right, so I think that's mostly all we're talking about, right? So if you imagined we had the call here where we could say, like, you know, something like this. Like, hey, if get overlapping entities, you know, whatever sort of the size of the thing is that we were going to make here, which is like this thing. In fact, we could actually produce we could store these two up here and use them as the actual query. So I think this is like center P and dim of the entity. So we could basically say, hey, if this thing if this thing would intersect another entity, don't place it, right? So we're only going to place things that wouldn't intersect anything else. And, you know, maybe we would shrink that by a little bit, but we're basically asking this. And we need like an offset. So this is like the offset from this P here. So, you know, sort of this P here that we would be using to place it, we would be using this offset from it, right? So I think that's mostly all we would need to do. Now, whether we want to bake that in there or not, I'm not sure. And similarly, we could just say we don't really care about... You know what? This is backwards. My bad. It's dimension and offset. We could also say we don't really care about the displacement particularly much either. I'm not sure. But it depends on how we want to do this. So we'll say that we want to do that for now. We'll see. Maybe that's fine. And we might want to shrink this down because we don't want to require it to be super exact. So we just want to say, look, if most of this tile is empty, then we want to splat the thing down here, probably. So this may want to be, and I think we call this add radius too. This may want to be shrunk a little bit. So, you know, I don't know what the shrink would actually be, but, you know, maybe it's something like, you know, we just want to sort of contract it a little bit on top of what the, you know, the actual size of the thing's going to be, just to make sure that we don't pick up any sort of errant thing that's hanging over from an adjacent tile. So I'm guessing we want, something like this where like get overlapping entities where we can, you know, return some kind of a list of entities that are overlapping this particular thing. I'm not sure how we want to do that right now, but we'll probably just send some temp memory down, and we'll actually maybe make that function produce an actual list. Seems reasonable. I mean, there's reasons to not want to actually make a list out of it, not to waste the time. You know, so we could make this thing be more of like an iterator. But But you know what? I'll leave that decision for a little bit later. And what I could say is, we could say, we could just make a call that says, hey, I want to know if there's any overlapping entities for this area, and we'll figure out how we implement that exactly later. But this is what I want to see. I want to see something where I can say, here's where I'm going to place the thing. Let's make sure that there's nothing there. Then we'll go ahead and place it, assuming that there isn't, right? And again, this will just for now generate effectively the same sort of stuff we're generating inside rooms or outside rooms or whatever. And we'll deal with that part later, right? So I think that's all we really need to do. And so the majority of the work is going to be, we need to sort of add this stuff. I'll add the crappy version of that maybe first, and then we'll add a better version later. For the moment, we want to focus on how this actually gets called, because right now it never would be. And so if we go into world gen, at the point where we actually go and do stuff here, I don't know what this garbage is. This is all old stuff. We don't need any of this, really. I don't think. Yeah, we don't need any of that stuff. We should probably just delete it. But in here we call create world, right? This is what's going to happen. And what we want to do is when we go to this generate world call, where we've sort of built all of the lists of stuff. There we go. This function, or sorry, this for loop is going to call all the generate room operations that we have to do, which will create all of the world entities, and then it will also create that list of aprons that we need to be concerned with. So immediately after that, we should be able to say, hey, let's go ahead and loop over all the aprons and generate those. And that should give us effectively the entire behavior of the thing, right? All right, so the generate apron call probably needs to get hoisted up to here, like so. And then we gotta look at any bugs that we've got. This should just be apron. And floor tile Z is what exactly? I don't even know what that came from or how we were creating that. It's just the min tile. Yeah, so this is just that. And we have to figure out our wall height. Forgot to put that up there where it should have gone. And we've got two dims here. So, okay, so there's that dim. So this is really the, I guess we should call this the cube P and the cube dim. Might be a better way to say that. And then we've got the cube dim there, and the cube P here, cube dim, cube P. And that's just for placing the little cube things. So what else? Our add radius 2 is unhappy. I'm not sure why. Ah, I see. Oh, well, but wait, this is a cube dim. This isn't a rectangle. So I'm not sure why I said add radius 2, because that we should just be really doing a rectangle there. So really this should just be rect center half dim or something like this. I don't know if this is the cube dimension. Are our cubes 0.7 total? I guess not. So this is the half dim, right? So really this is rectangle center half dim, and we want, you know, our cube dim plus this v3 is what we're going to actually query on. And that way we'll just pass a rectangle 3 to this thing. And that'll be clear, like, what's going on, right? Okay. So, yeah, and this would be like the query region, maybe I'd call this, just so we can get this out here. Oop. And that's going to be a rectangle 3, which will, just give us a bounding area. All right. So then I can say query region. We don't have this function yet, so that's going to be an error, obviously. But otherwise, hopefully we should be good to go. Stone floor here, we don't really have, so I think we're just going to go with like, yeah, it's grass at the moment. Honestly, there only is outdoors, so like, we don't really have anything to do with any of this stuff. In fact, this isn't even really necessary. Maybe I'll just do, does it have trees? And so I think this is really more what we're looking at. There isn't really a generate an apron of a floor of actual man-made area. So we need a way of doing our overlapping entities exist. Let's see here. So when we do this add entity, we need here to pass down the sim region that we're actually talking about here. And so in there, I believe, yeah, so in generate room, we do this world change here, which is sort of saying hey, this is the area that we want to actually edit as part of this. And we're going to want to do that for here too. So when we're ready, we want to effectively say, let's do a begin world change. We have to figure out where the change center is and where the rectangle is, but that's just going to be this volume. And so if I look at how we're computing that, we should be able to just do it exactly the same. And this stuff probably should get pulled out into a similar thing, into a single unified call we can use. I'm going to make it to do that effect. But for now, I'll leave it be. And so when we actually, begin the world change there, the tile dim is just this. You can just see there's too much business here. This stuff we should really kind of collapse down, and it just should be more straightforward. Okay, and we can also pull out the random series here because we're going to probably do some entropy-based stuff as well, right? Yeah, you can see here we've got our entity sort of variance there. This probably wants to be here too, right? Yeah. Curious about this. Well, we'll deal with it later. Anyway, let's see. So yeah, placing the entity only happens if we actually have an entity, and there's one too many of those. That's why we've messed up when we edited the else clause out there. But then all I guess we need is just the color here, and the color for our current purposes, I don't know what we want to do here. Probably nothing in particular. So I may just say yeah, the color is going to be something fairly... It's interesting that we should probably not be colorizing this stuff in weird ways, but we are right now. So we should probably just make the color of this thing be something straightforward. So maybe the color of these things is just that or whatever. And we'll just pass that down. It's just pure gray. So I think that puts us in, and let me just make sure we sort of record the world change here and say that we're done. But I think that's it. And so all I really need to do now is have some way of actually figuring out whether there was entities in that area. And again, that's this call right here, and we need some way of that returning information to us. If I go to the sim region, what I could do is just loop over all the entities and see if any of them do. And that's a good first attempt. So that's the slow, crappy version, but at least we can see whether or not the rest of our stuff is working. So what we would do for that is we'd just say, you know, hey, the same code we were using before, we basically just need to say, yeah, give us the sim region. Actually, and since we're in sim region land, we really just need a rectangle 3, which is like, tell us what the bounds of this thing are, right? And then what we can do is loop over all of these and check if they collide. Here we go. So here's here's essentially the same call, right? So what we can do is say, here's the collision volumes of these things or whatever is happening, and off we go, right? The only thing that I think is a little bit tricky about this is I don't know if those collision volumes... We're probably going to have to like solidify, pun intended, our approach to collision volumes to make sure that everyone actually gets one, because I don't know that we actually set up collision volumes for everybody, but we should. We have a flag that says whether things participate in collisions, so there's no reason not to have a collision volume on something, because we can use it for our own queries like we're doing now. So we don't really want to ever have anyone who doesn't have a collision volume initialized. Like if you're 0, 0, 0, that's not good. You should bound whatever your area is somehow, right? But anyway, so this is effectively all we would need, assuming that we start cleaning the rest of this collision stuff up, where we can essentially say, look, if whatever the entity is that we're looking at here, I guess actually this just normally gets these calls. It's weird because entity overlaps rectangle. It doesn't actually get an entity passed. So that's really actually just doing the volume check to see if these intersections occur, right? So what I think that means is we can just pass those down, right? So we can just say, look, here's the collision volume in the entity P, and then here is the bounds, and if that overlap happens, then there was something there. So we would return true in this case. Okay, so that's more or less all we're talking about. And again, there's sort of like the old collision stuff lying there. Now we probably want to go in there and actually get that collision stuff whipped into shape and make sure we have collision volumes for everything. We can draw them today and make sure that they all do stuff as well. So here what I want to do is say, well, we've got this world position. We don't care about that. We can just do where that we can actually just create sort of the location of that thing in the space of the region itself. I'll be honest, I don't actually even know why that's there. If we look at place entity, I don't know why we're using world positions, because we don't actually need it. In fact, you can see right here us actually doing the subtraction in the first place. So again, a lot of stuff eligible for cleanup here. As we start to move down and clean up how the entity stuff is working, we should be able to kind of get rid of a lot of this busy work, because we don't actually need to be working in terms of world position anymore. We kind of inherited that from the fact that we used to generate stuff that way, but none of this stuff is necessary. All you would need to know is where your corner world position was, and then all of this stuff would just be based off of that, right? So this is all stupid, and we don't really need to do it. It's just coming at everything completely backwards. And so we probably want to stop working with these. I mean, right here we could probably just say to do KC. Now that we edit in sim region space, there is no reason for all this world position nonsense, right? Because world positions actually, they're just a storage format. And since we're only creating like a local region at any given time, we don't ever need to talk about them. they're really something that only has to occur when you go to like pack the world back for storage, so that you can have huge worlds without floating point precision issues. But we don't need to talk about them here. They're just kind of a waste of time, and we should probably just stop using them. But anyway, that's fine. This same code would work just fine, right? So we can say, like, look, the location of this thing is pretty straightforward anyway. It would just look like this. And that would allow us to say, okay, now we know what the actual, position of this thing is. And so at that point, if we know the query region part here and the cube P thing here, now we can make cube P and P kind of work together and say, all right, the rectangle, or rather the query region here just needs to be offset by this position and we're good to go. So we can say, like, offset this thing by this, and that's, going to give us the location that we actually need. So I think that properly produces everything, but yeah, I'm not 100% sure. Let's start by calling it, and we'll sort of look into how it's actually working. My biggest thing that we probably want to focus on now, although we could go ahead and fix this whole part about using world positions for no reason, that's probably a good thing to do. Maybe we'll do that tomorrow. But this call right here, again, is the biggest thing I think we'll start to focus on, because we want to start making the sim region be more powerful and not have to loop over all these entities all the time to answer simple questions. We want to have a good spatial query system in there, so that's probably another thing we'll focus on. So going into the sim region, going into the world gen first, we need to actually tell it to generate some of these aprons. Right now, we've never requested any, so if I go to like the orphanage, for example, what we haven't done right now, I don't know what this is talking about. I thought we already did that. I'm going to delete that because since I don't know what it means, it can't really help us. In here, right, when we generate all these room specs, what we want to do is say, well, let's go ahead and make sure that these specs actually have apron specs where they need to, right? So if I said gen apron spec, and I make one of these, then what I can do is say, all right, all of these things that that we created here, right? Maybe I want to do that. Now, it could be that really I would like to be able to make it a little simpler. So since that's something that we probably put on a lot of things, maybe I'll just make that be part of the gen spec call. So when we make one of these, you can optionally pass, like, hey, I want this apron here. Know what I'm saying? And then that should probably be sufficient. So if we go to the gen spec call, when we create one of these things, I should be able to do like a gen apron spec call here, right? And so in here where we create one of these, if you want to pass an apron spec to it, it'll automatically put it in there for you, but like you don't have to. And then in here we would just say, okay, when you create one of these, it gets initialized to 0. And off you go. I think that would do it. Don't quote me on that, though. And I think... that's it. And that should just start calling the apron generator. And the apron generator probably just won't work properly yet because I don't really think that overlap call is correct. So I think we're probably like over generating stuff now. But you can see like what I was trying to do already. Like you see how there's like now there's grass tiles out there. That's what I want, right? I wanted grass tiles. And hopefully, now you can't really get to places, and I don't know if 8 was enough, but hopefully now you've always got these sort of grassy bits there, and that way you can kind of see, yeah, you can just always see something outside the place where you are, which is the goal. So again, I suspect probably what's happening though is we're generating way too many of them. Like I suspect that even though you can't see it, we're probably generating ones underneath, like here maybe. I don't really know. Maybe our collision call is actually working. I doubt it. But that's all I wanted. You can sort of see how now it looks like there's stuff outside of the world area, which is all I wanted. When we come down here, right, the dungeon areas don't have aprons associated with them, so you can see that they're not getting any, which is exactly what I wanted, so that's good. So all of this looks fine. That seems good. And yeah, like you can see that the apron is exactly what I wanted, which is 8 wide around everything. That may be overkill. I'm not sure. And I guess I'll be honest, I don't really see much over generation there. Although, well, there I do see some, right? So it's generating multiple things around that. So basically the apron, at the very least, it's not picking up its own stuff, right? Probably because these cube pieces don't have collision geometry associated with them, right? So there's actually lots of apron tiles probably stacked on top of each other here. What I could do is draw the cubes as outlines to see that as well, which I think we might want to do. But let me just kind of play with this a little bit first. So yeah, let's suppose, in fact, maybe, how do I want to look at this? So in here, right, when we're doing place entity, we're really not doing anything to give this thing a collision region. And so if I did want to give it a collision region for the cube, what I would want to do is, yeah, if we look at the way those entities have collision volumes set up, what you can see in here is probably that there's just one collision volume rectangle, yeah. And so you just set whatever the volume is that this thing is supposed to occupy, and that's what we're going to be colliding against. For something like this, it means that anytime in here that we add an entity, we need to actually set whatever that collision volume is going to be. If you look in here, when we create sort of the entity, we don't give it a collision volume anywhere for these ground tiles, I don't think. Let me take a quick look to make sure I'm not wrong about that. But if I... Yeah, I mean, you can see that we don't do anything with the collision volumes there, right? So I think what we want to do is just set a collision volume here that we can see, and that would hopefully also give us the ability to verify that there weren't multiple things in one, like on top of each other. So let me first add them to try and prevent aprons from being generated on top of themselves. And then we'll add them for the main ones as well. And I think that's mostly what we want to do. So when we have the entity here, and we're going to sort of place it down, I think all I should have to do for the apron part of things is just say, well, we just said what its rectangle was. It's this. And so if that's all we need, we should be able to just pass that down as the collision volume, right? And we can start to clean this up a little bit more as we go. Let's see here. So now these things, each of these things should have collision volumes. I'll be honest, the fact that they're not being drawn doesn't fill me with confidence. But that may just be because they don't participate in collision. Let's take a look. So you can see here that we switch on whether or not the entity has a collision volume that has any volume to it, and then we just set the color based on whether or not it collides. But we should be pushing a volume outline here based on the entity location and the collision volume. So you would assume that we would therefore see collision volumes for all of these apron entities, right? And yet I don't. And I suppose you can see that it's not working either because they're not actually climbing each other. So I'm not sure why this wouldn't be making them all show up that way. I'm gonna have to step into that and see, because I don't have any idea why that wouldn't give us, right? Because I don't see anything else here other than just checking if the collision volume has area, which it would seem like it would have to. Although, actually, I guess there is one reason why it wouldn't, which is this makes it smaller than itself. So let's try this, as unwise as this may be. I'm going to turn off cube rendering entirely and see what I can see there, right? Okay, so that's all it was. It's just that they're kind of, you can't see them because they're inside, right? And so now, if we look, I think this is actually working just fine. Because what you can see is that when it goes to check the volume to see if it should place something there, it will stack more than one on top of itself if they can fit, right? So I think all we have to do there is just make sure that when we query, like, we shouldn't use the same query region as the collision region. So I think what we want to do here is say, like, collision region equals this. Right? And so we use the collision region to create the thing, but then the query region should actually be like something that's taller and extends more, like it has different z bounds than this does, right? And so maybe it's something like, maybe it's something like query region max z is like quite a bit larger or something, just to make sure it can pick up anything in that area, right? I don't know if I did that correctly. Looks pretty good. Well, does it actually? No, it doesn't. Oh, no, maybe it does. It's hard to read when you only see that part of it. Let's take a look here. So there you can see that it still doesn't seem to be working properly there, right? Because it should never be able to do that, because the query region should have been much taller. Well, temporarily, show me what the query region actually is. Why don't you? So that's not as high as I thought it was. It still should have prevented any of those double additions, though, I would think. And I definitely saw... Yeah, like... at least I thought I saw a double addition. Let's move outward from here. All right. Maybe I didn't. I don't see any now, which is weird. Maybe I was hallucinating and that we did fix it. Always makes me a little bit nervous, though, if I think I saw a bug and then I don't see a bug. I think it's just hiding. So it may be that adding the collision volume as the query region and thus expanding it is what actually allows it to work properly. So it could be that actually when you have one of the full regions and one of the other ones, it can stack. I guess that makes sense because if you, yeah, you could stack on top of each other if you don't provide that sort of extra collision. So I suppose that would make sense. So I don't know how I feel about that. If that was the case, you know, yeah, we would need something like this, right? We would need to expand it more. I don't know if that's a good idea. I feel like there's reasons why it might not be. But maybe that's the right solution for now. I'm not sure. Yeah. So I think that probably gives us mostly what we want. And I think now we've gotten rid of most of those double additions. I think so, anyway. All right, so if I was to go ahead and turn off volume rendering for now, we should put some debug switches in so we can just turn these on and off without recompiling, because you know they're pretty common things that we do. So yeah, like if we look now, I think we've pretty much got it under control, like how we would add the stuff for the apron, and that's really all I wanted, was something along those lines, right? And you know, we should probably have them be, we should probably get the colors under control so that the apron colors match the colors otherwise, for the most part. So I'm kind of interested in that. So you can see, it looks like the query to test to see whether or not there was any occupying people, like the fact that there was stuff under there made it so that it didn't fill. And that was kind of what I was worried about. And so I think that means our query might be like wrong. You know what I'm saying? It's picking up stuff from lower. Let's take a look at what those query regions actually look like. Well, that won't help us. But yeah, let's rerun it and see what those look like so that we can get a sense for what it's actually picking up there. You know what it is picking up? It's picking up the room. That's what it's picking up. So we can probably get rid of that because it's not a real entity in that sense. But you can see why this is kind of a delicate process, right? So we want, yeah, but that's, if when we do that entity query here, we can just say, look, if it's the room you're talking about, we don't really care about that. Why is that jump failing? Jump to overlapping entities exist. Why is it going there? That's really weird. I mean, I guess it's nearby to it, but not really. Anyway, so in here we want to do like if it's not a room. Right? We don't want to use like those kind of volume queries. What we could do is have a flag for this as well, where we're just saying, look, is this an entity that doesn't occupy space, you know, that isn't relevant, right? And I'm not sure how we want to necessarily treat that, but if we look at how we do room stuff in general, you can see it's really just this special query here. We may want to do something like this. So we'll just make a way of testing that here, like this. And then we can say like, oh, well, if it's a room, do this thing. And so then I think we'll start to get into issues that we would have to address there. In fact, you can kind of see exactly what our problem is now. So now we have the issue of the room area doesn't prevent us from creating stuff inside there, right? So maybe this was a bad idea. And so we can fix that in one of two ways. I'm just trying to decide which way. What's going on here? Maybe we may have just overflowed our actual output buffer there. So looking at that, I guess I don't, I guess I really don't want that. I do want the room to be able to do it, but the problem is I need to make sure that I don't look too far down into where that other room would be. And I'm not sure how to manage those two concerns, right? But this gives us a really nice thing that keeping it out of the room was actually good, because not only did it prevent us from having to deal with any of the other minutia, but it means like stairwells and stuff where there wouldn't be things. The room boundary prevents you from filling that in as well, which I want. And so I'm just not sure how to deal with the query otherwise. What is this? What is happening here? We've got we're too many for one dispatch when we're doing our push quads here, right? So it's like somehow this thing is not correctly anticipating how many of these things are going to come down to break the batch up. Because, right, like, here's base index, and, well, I guess I can't do it because we're in release mode. But you can see what this is an assertion here that's saying, I need to be able to fit my vertex base into a 16-bit value, because if I can't, we won't be able to use just 16-bit vertex indices in order to do it, which is all we're using right now. So this is like overflowing the number of these that we're actually creating. That's a bug because inside the renderer we were supposed to create new batches every time we overflowed that number. And so that's a little bit weird, and I'm not sure why we were getting that. I want to say that we did that, but maybe we didn't. No, it's right here. So max quads per batch is supposed to be checked here, where we say however many quads we're going to do had better not be greater than the maximum number that you can have, right? So the fact that that's not working is not reassuring. Let me go ahead and build a debug build so that we can take a look at why that's not working, because that's kind of important. And we don't really want that to be a lurking bug, because you'll get render artifacts if not, right? Okay, so I guess all I did was kind of hop out towards the other part here, right? Like somewhere. And so looking at this, you can see, I mean, this is exactly what I said, right? We ended up in a place where we just have pushed too many of these. What I don't understand is when we, in this function, looked at the number of quads we were pushing down, I'm just wondering, I guess well, you know, the thing is, we're not actually calling get current quad. So who was responsible for that call? Pushing line segments on here. Well, can't say it wasn't pretty straightforward. Like, it's basically saying, make sure we have room for 6 quads. Does that look like 6 quads to you? No, it does not. In case anyone was wondering, that is something we actually call 12, which is related to 6, but is not 6. So I think that's probably all we're dealing with there, is failure to reserve a place to actually dump those vertices. Not our finest hour. Yeah. All right, and so back to the original problem. I just don't know how I want to make sure I get information about things occupying the bottom. Here's the way I think I want to do it. I think what I want to do is take a different approach. Let's suppose that what we actually want here is when we produce this query region here, what I want to do is not offset the query region z-wise probably at all. So what I want to do, I think, is something more along the lines of get rid of this stuff. So that's gone. When we produce this, we want to make sure the z is like flat. So yeah, this should be fine. And this maybe is that. Something like this probably makes a little bit more sense to me at the moment. Let's take a look at this, and then we can play with this a little bit separately. All right, so if I run this, you can see that everything's flat now, right? And hopefully that means that now it will correctly avoid rooms where rooms are, but not where rooms aren't. Maybe. And we'll see whether that's true or not. Not quite. And you can see why that is. So those are flat and they're right. So they need to be lifted up because these are too low down too. You can actually see. So yeah, we just want to make sure we're careful about our placement here, I guess, is how this wants to work. So yeah. I guess we just want the world P's offset z to be half the wall height to place it at the right location. And that's it. Is this correctly aligned now? No, it's still too low down. You can see it clips down into the bottom room. So what is going on here? How come we don't know like where our floor is and stuff? Like something's busted. We should figure out what's going on here because this doesn't really make much sense to me. Like we know what the bottom part of the room is. Like somebody's creating this room. Like here's the room volume in question, right? We've got the volume for the room is the min room P, max room P, which is created like this way. And I feel like this stuff is just all kind of sloppy. But I mean, we want these things to be lying directly on the floor area so that they're contained within the room that they're supposed to be aproning. Well, not contained within the room, but at the same correct level as the room they're supposed to be aproning, right? I mean, that's what we would expect. And so that just seems kind of busted and weird, and I don't like it. So what I would prefer here is, yeah, if this was just more sane. The way this is currently working looks like if you place something for whatever reason at the floor Z, if you place something at a Z of 0, it's too low, so it needs to be up like half a tile dim or something. I don't quite get it. I feel like I want to. How much time do I have? What have I got? I got 25 minutes. Let's say, maybe. I want to clean this up so that we have some idea of where everything's going. So I think I'm going to make that be what our job is now, because I think that's the only thing that's actually standing in our way here, and I don't like the way this looks. So I think as part of that too, getting these world positions out of here would be a good start. All right, so let's think about this a little bit differently. What I want to do is I want to take a look at these room volumes, right? And so if we take a look at where these room volumes are, and I look at how things are arranged in the room volumes, you can see there that we've got that offset. I believe what that offset was designed to do is to give us a safe region, right? So everything's like comes up off of the bottom of that room floor, right? And so I'm guessing, and I guess I don't know, but I'm guessing that the best way to, or the best rule of thumb to follow here would be to, when we create an edit region, that a Z of 0 is the floor. Is not the floor, is the bottom, the base, the lowest part of the room volume is 0, right? And so, yeah, if we were to do that, and in here, we look at how we're doing this this stuff here with the change center, right, all that stuff. So if we wanted to make 0 be the bottom, when we get back this, right, we would just say that 0 lies along the bottom of the thing. That means that when we record the volume of the actual room, which is here, this would not, we don't need these two things really, right? What we want to do instead is talk about it like in here, right? In fact, we could just say, look, the min room P Z is always 0, right? Just to give you some example of what I'm talking about there. So let's suppose that we said something like that. Where is that actually lying right now, right? And it looks like that's what we're doing, right? Because that looks like it's basically the same place that it was. So I think if we just always say that it's 0, and let's take a look out here where we've got multiple levels and make sure that that still does make sense. But I think it should, because again, this placement is all relative to a simulation region. And so if I come out here and say, you know, where is everything? It still looks correct to me there, right? We've got the rooms sort of stacked up, and you know, that all looks plausible, right? So let's just work backwards from there and like create the actual room area in like a more sensible way. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to pull this stuff up to the top, right? So I'm going to take this and I'm going to pull this up here so we can work with it all together. So we've got this sort of thing that like cracks this stuff out and says, hey, here's the room volume and all that garbage. So let's take a look at stuff like the tile dim and all that stuff too, right? All right, so here we go. So if we know that the minimum z is 0, then we also know that the maximum z, right? We can work backwards here and say, well, that the maximum is just going to be however high the thing was times the tile dim, right? I mean, that's the height of the thing. So we know that just going into it. There's nothing particularly tricky about that. Similarly, if we wanted to get the bounds of the thing, we should be able to do the same thing in reverse for everything, right? So if we know that this was going to be the center of the thing that we were working on, then we should be able to figure out the bounds of everything else by just using, you know, the same math. If we know that we're going to start at the min tile x plus the x count over 2, then we should be able to just say, well, however much the x count needs to be to get out to halfway is what we would need, right? It'd be like 0.5 times the x count times the tile dim x, right, is how wide the room should be. And similarly, the same thing would be true in y, right? And the max room p is just the same as the opposite of the min room p. So there's really nothing, fancy about that, right? And so these two things can actually just be created whole cloth. They don't really need to operate they don't need to be mapped into chunk space or any of that garbage. And I don't think we need any of this stuff either because we can apply those directly. So we wanted this half tile dim here as an offset. So we sort of wanted to say, it looks like anyway, that we're like a half tile over. And I believe that that's probably for this garbage, right? Which again, we can now, I think, hopefully, maybe, sort of, I'm not sure, but let's pretend possibly that we can. If we just said, let's do this correctly, so this part here where we do like chunk position from tile position, and we're like, let's get ourselves here. If this part here, whether this is an even division or an odd division, is going to control like where we are alignment-wise, which is kind of annoying, right? We have here, this is our dimensions, and in fact, we're computing it. You can see right here, we're computing exactly how big we want our region, pretty exactly here. We can just even get that from these two values eventually if we want to, or we could even do this a little more. You know what? I mean, we can just do this, right? So we can just say, look, here's the room dimensions. It's this. So the min room p is just going to be created off of the room dimensions, or maybe we even just use that as the way we map things in. In fact, why wouldn't we? That makes way more sense, because then that essentially means all we have to do is this. Oops. Right, if we just say, instead of the chain center here, what if we just said, look, give us the world position of the min world P. This is like the min corner. And then we would know what the min room P was here. Well, I guess technically no, we can't do that because we do want to offset it. We do want to get to, you know, we do want to start in the middle of the room. So I suppose there is no real way to do what I'm talking about. Yeah, so we do kind of have to do something where we actually find out what that is. So, oh well. Anyway. So if we assume, again, that we're going to place this at the center, so the sim region is centered on the room, and that 0, but not in Z, it's at the actual floor. So if we do something along those lines, and then here we say, okay, let's go ahead and take the... Oh, but you know what? We don't have to center it. We could choose not to do that, because since we can pass a change rectangle, and that rectangle doesn't have to be 0-centered, I guess we can just do what I was going to say. So actually, you could make this be just this, right? We say, look, that's what we're going to base everything around. Here's the room dimension. The min room P, therefore, is always just 0, 0, 0. Because that's where that part of the chain center is. The max room P, therefore, is just the room dimensions, right? Because we go from 0 to the room dimensions, done, right? Then, when we say what the change rectangle is, all we're saying is maybe rect min-max, where we've got the min room P and the max room P, and if we want to add some additional area to that, we can just say, all right, well, why don't you just add to that something, whatever the, you know, amount is that we want there, right? So maybe we want to say, let's add 4 tiles in any direction. I don't know. Probably not. Just 1 tile in any direction should be sufficient, right? Because we don't really do anything beyond that. So maybe like 1 tile in any direction is fine. Not sure. We can think about that a little bit harder later. But this is the change rectangle, and then off we go. So then we can just say like change. I'm going to call this change base P and change volume. Okay, maybe not. That's a function, apparently. All right. So I think that all works pretty well, and I think probably that's all we really need there. And I don't know what this dim XYZ nonsense is there. Oh, it's just the dim for this room. That's fine. All right. So I think we're getting closer here to what I actually want. And now, where we've got the min room P and the max room P, let's see where we're at compile error-wise, and I'm going to start to clean this stuff up. The change center, what is this? Oh, placing an entity. So when we place the entity for the collision volume, where we've got the rect min max, min room P, max room P, chain center, I guess we can do that, because I guess there's no reason not to. It's a little weird. It means that that is not a centered collision volume, but I guess we don't care. that that isn't a centered collision volume? Don't know. All right, so anyway, yeah, and now we can see what the half rectangle issue was there, right? So because those are centered, the half rect bit slides it as an offset because we want everything to be on the boundary, right? So this half, that's what the half tile dim displacement was before. However, there's an open question in my mind as to whether or not we really want that to be the case. Like, if we think about it, do we really need those to be centered positions anyway? Maybe we want them to be, I don't know. But anyway, when we look at how we're doing this, this stuff can go away, right? We don't use that anymore. Where are those getting used? Oh, are we using world rooms for anything, by the way? I think we're using those for maps. But that's fine. And so what we really want here, we don't really need these for anything other than just like map into chunk space. And so what we want to do is just be able to pass that. Yeah. So we've got our world and our base pose and our offset. But we don't really need... Oh, I guess we do. So the min room and the max room values that we created here, the min room, max room P, we need those to be mapped into chunk space, and those would be based just off the sim region center. So the world position would be the change base P, like so. I think that's all we actually need there. Yeah. So that's all fine. We don't really use those at the moment anyway. So then we really just have that offset to deal with. And so when we create our change base P here, I guess what we want to do is like the chunk position from tile position. Oops. The additional offset part, we just need to pass the half tile dim down. So I think that's it, and then I think we're good to go. So now all those rooms are tightly bounded, I believe, and so hopefully that's all good. So moving along to phase 2. So, you know, the min tile X part of things, I want to look now and see, does that actually, yeah, like what's all this garbage and why are we doing all this stuff? So it looks like mostly, yeah, like what we're doing here is using this for a way of checking the gen grids, which is honestly okay. I mean, it's not horrible, but I'm not sure we really want to keep that stuff around. I have to think about that some more. Like, it'd be nice if we could do this a little bit more structured here. Yeah. I don't know. I'm still not quite loving it. So floor tile Z, what is that? What are we doing with that? It's just min tile Z, so I'm not sure why we're actually calling it that. I guess as if the floor could be somewhere else. Yeah, I don't know. Let's, I guess, do some of the more basic stuff first. So if we actually want this to just be normal stuff, this chunk position from tile position stuff, again, we shouldn't really need to do anything with that, really. We should be able to do something more like this, where we just say, look, the position of this thing is actually not related to any of that stuff. Instead, we can just say, like, the position of any one of these things is just the tile dim x times the x index plus the tile dim y times the y index, right? And that's all we really needed. We don't really need anything else about it. That just tells us where the thing is. And then as we go through the rest of this code, wherever we were doing stuff like setting the offset or nonsense like that, we should be able to now just talk about this directly. Like so. And when we place entities, we shouldn't have to use world positions at all then either, right? So when we actually call a place entity call like this, we should be able to make that use raw code now, right? Yeah. I don't know, where are those other place entity calls? What are those doing? But those are ones that aren't actually working directly on entities. So, this sort of stuff, right? In fact, we could just say like that just goes away. And so now, instead of calling place entity, you just assign the position you actually want to the thing, and that's all you had to do. Because that's all you should really have to do, right? You shouldn't have to do anything more complicated than that. So let's take a look here at... Here we go. So this PZ is just that, and this place entity is just entity P equals, right? So that should be all you have to actually do. And again, just trying to get rid of some of this nonsense so it's not all up in the way. Okay, so this is this. I don't know why I treated that like some kind of vector equation. It's not. And I think that's all we need for that one. We should have gotten an error on our other place entity call. Yeah, there it is. So looking at place entity here, there's also presumably on the entity gen code, there's a place entity definition somewhere. I don't actually know if that's true. Let's take a look. There is. So if I just remove that, and so people are not calling place entity anymore, we should get errors any place that's actually called. So you can see in here we've got this place entity P nonsense. I'm assuming that that's, yeah, it's doing a bunch of garbage like to create that P in the first place. So rather than doing that, now we should be able to just say, hey, like, where is that thing? And we're done, right? And again, this is just trying to clean up all that old sort of vestigial remain nonsense. And so now you can just say, all right, the glove P is P, the head P is P, and the body P is P, right? We're going to have to do that for a couple things, right? Because that's just, this was, again, just sort of an overhang from when this was more annoying and confusing. So it's really just this stuff. We don't need you to pass a P to these. These aren't even called. I don't know why I'm doing this, but, you know, heck, it's so simple. There's no reason not to leave them in working order. Okay, so then we've got two more here. You can see this one using the change base P. We don't actually need to do that. Because we did the min room P, max room P, it means that this entity doesn't need to be placed. Putting it at 0, 0, 0 is actually where it should go. So technically, you know, but just to keep the code like correctly semantically doing what it should do, I'm going to assign min room P to it here. It just happens to be 0, 0, 0. That way, if we change it in the future, we weren't like setting a little landmine for ourselves. It can't hurt. So then coming through here, we can now get rid of this sort of part of the process. And we can probably make this stuff something that we share as a call. But as you can see, this is not going to fly here. Now, what I could do, obviously, just temporarily, is to say that the entity P equals, you know, this, because we do create an actual P value. So I can do that, and that should just still work. But again, we want to continue the simplification process here and get it down to something that, you know, is cleaner than that, right? All right. So looking at it, it looks like we still have that half offset there, that which means I must have accidentally shifted the placement of these over. You can actually see that these are still placed properly because they're using the old code, and this is not, right? These are shifted relative to where they should be, which is kind of funny. So we want these things to line up. So let's just double check where I messed that up and correct it. So here in the generate room call, where we get the base P, this negative half tile dim should have aligned us. I thought it did when we checked it. So I wonder if by assigning the P values directly in here, I wonder if this is somehow off. Oh, I guess that's true. So the fact that this is using the half tile dim slid over, it means that where we place the entities will be slid half dim over as well. So I guess what you want to do is offset these guys by the half tile dim, right? So I don't know which one you want to do, because you can write it either way. Either you can place these guys off on the half tile dim, or you can place this off on a half tile dim. And I guess so that means you really just don't need this, right? Because you're going to have this be staggered by a half dim relative to where you're saying things are. So I'm not really sure what the cleanest way to represent that fact is, right? That's kind of an interesting one, right? I mean, because effectively what we're doing when we create the sim region is we're creating a local coordinate system that we're performing all of our edits in. And so if we shift the local coordinate system by, if the local coordinate system and the room are both at 0, 0, then that means in order to place the boundary or the entities, when we place those things, they have to be offset from each other by one half tile dim. Now, it doesn't matter who you offset. You could offset the room boundary by half tile dim, or you could offset the entities by half tile dim. And just because it seems like you place entities more, right? I wonder if we want to do this and say that, look, we're just going to place things at like min tile X, Y, Z, whatever. That's our basis. And then when we create the min room P, it's actually min room P. We will change that to be negative half tile dim, right? And then, you know, go from min room P to the room dim to create the dimension of the actual room. I don't know what I think of that. But that's more what I want. It looks like I'm still, though, wait a minute. Looks like I'm still getting an error there. The change base P is still coming from here, so that should be correct. The half tile dim should be back. That seems correct, doesn't it? So that was slightly nonsensical what was happening there. Let me just double check where I actually place the collision volume here. So it's a rect min max of min room P to max room P. That seems correct. Oh, no, it's not correct. So again, this should just always be at 0, 0, 0 because the collision volume is taking this into account. So there's two ways we can do it, right? We can pass min room P, max room P here, and 0, 0, 0 here. Or we can pass min room P here and just actually pass the room dimension as the collision volume rooted at 0, 0, 0. I don't know, again, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I don't know that there's a correct answer. But that all seems good now, and I think I'll leave it at that for today. But, well, maybe I won't. Maybe this should be changed now to do it, to sort of link those two together. So if you take a look at what's going on here, right, again, I'm not sure. I want to push a little further into this, so maybe I will stop and we'll pick this up tomorrow. But just looking at how this is working, right, I still don't love the fact that we ask questions about the global tile X, Y, and Z here. I almost want to say this stuff should be, these volumes should be mapped into the local space, and we should be doing the test there, but, you know, I have mixed feelings about it. Let's put it that way. Yeah, I don't know. So let's take a look at where half tile dim is used at all. So it's really only there. So what I might want to do is something more like this. And just get rid of this. And then, yeah, like, this stuff I feel like we don't really need the X count, Y count, Z count necessarily too. Like that could just come into here because I don't think, you know, that's what the dim was supposed to be. So, I mean, I feel like we should be able to do, like, right? So maybe we could do something more like this. Just again to sort of simplify it down a little bit. Something like that. Can't we just do get a, like, isn't there just a get volume call? Like, tell me how big this thing is volumetrically? I feel like there should be a way to just ask that of the GenMath thing itself. So yeah, I don't see it, but I'm going to add it. So in here we'll just say, hey, I want to know what this total volume is, actually, please. And so we'll just do the result is vol get dim vol. Actually, so get total volume can just take a v3, actually. Should be able to take a gen v3, right? I would think. And then that that you could choose to call if you wanted to. The get volume first on it or not. So it's more or less just that. So I think that in here we can just say, yeah, get the total volume for the tile count, and that'll just return that value, which is what we want. And then I can get rid of the rest of these here. So where is dim there? Grid dim equals tile count. And that's tile count X, tile count Y. Just keep that a little bit closer bundled. Any more of those? You know, this one, I feel like we should just be passing the dim there. If we go to get camera offset Z for dim, in here, I kind of feel like I want to do something more like you pass a gen v3 to this. Well, although, does this get used in other places? No, it doesn't. And I think that you'd want to know the Z here anyway. And so that's probably something that wants to be looked at anyway. So I think we'll probably want to pass that. Okay, so again, a little more cleaned up. Still, you know, could stand to use a good one more time through probably. Looking at this, so let's see. And yeah, the min tile stuff could probably be stand to be collapsed as well. You know, I'm not sure if the gen math code has a get min in it. I mean, it's just .min, so not really particularly exciting, but right, it's just this. So I don't know. I mean, I could just do that, right? I could just say like it's the room of all min, right? And then maybe that's a little bit cleaner there too, so that we're not like spamming out these local variables for no particular reason. Furthermore, this call for the base P, I feel like that is a good candidate for taking a gen v3 as well, because chunk position from tile position is really not something that should be happening in the game. It's strictly the tiles. The game doesn't care about tiles at all. The game's completely freeform, so you don't have to be on a grid for any particular reason. So I feel like that's something that wants to be sort of in the world gen stuff anyway. And you can see that it is, right? So I feel like that sort of wants to take a gen v3 because that's what you're normally going to have, right? I want to say. And if you don't have one, you could just get one. Another way to say it would be, let's provide both, right? I mean, why not? So then we could just say, if you pass a gen v3, then we just give a call and that way we don't have to worry about passing these things separately, so we can just say like min tile and go. Similarly, change base P now in theory really shouldn't probably be getting used much at all. We can almost remove it if we had a if this world room stuff is sort of for adding maps later, right? It's just provisional but we probably do want to keep it. I think we probably will need it. So I'm not going to eliminate the change base P yet. I'll leave it on there. But otherwise, yeah, min tile can now be represented as just a dot accessor, like so. And that should be fine. Looking at this, you could almost see like this stuff could probably be treated as a vector now, as a Gen v3 as well. So we may want to do that too, but you know, off we go. All right, so I'm going to consider that done for now. I took the extra 15 minutes that we technically should have had because I think the clock I didn't actually start the clock on time. It started early. But I think we're all good now, and we've got the aprons in there the way I want. So I'm pretty pleased with that. What I want to do tomorrow is like clean up the way that we're generating those volumes so that this part works. So I'm going to leave that for tomorrow, and also maybe tomorrow we'll add the ability to like, you know, I want to fix that problem, right? I also don't know, why are those double stacked like that? What's happening there? Oh, that's just this room boundary drawing across the middle. That's fine. And also maybe we'll go in and put some trees into the apron just to finish that off and make sure all that kind of garbage works. So I think we're all good now. We probably have to change from clearing to gray to clearing to black, at least in release mode. Because again, underneath we kind of want that to be true. So we'll sort of work on that stuff. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but I'm relatively happy with that. We'll go to a brief Q&A for anybody who has questions. Why have a separate apron concept instead of just generating rooms on the sides? Well, so what I tend not to do, and you know, I don't feel strongly about this, so I'm not trying to say that it's some kind of like a programming guideline, but it's my personal preference, is if I'm mentally thinking about two things as being separate, I tend to write them separate in the code, at least at first. And then if it becomes overwhelmingly obvious to me later that they're the same, I will merge them. But I don't usually start with them merged. The reason for that is I feel like when code is written for a specific purpose, it tends to end up being more clean. And so I usually like to see if... I like to look at what the clean version looks like first, and then later decide to merge two things if I think it won't affect the complexity too much. Rather than a priori saying, look, the areas outside rooms and the areas inside rooms are similar, so let me just make one generator that generates both. I'm sort of pre-assuming that I know the answer to the question is that they are sufficiently similar to not make the code be unnecessarily complicated. And hard to read for either one, right? So really that is the reason. So we may end up collapsing aprons and rooms into the same thing in the future. But we'll make that decision based on seeing if it really makes sense, right? Will aprons be underground and ground level only, or will you have sky aprons for upper levels, like in the case of a tall tower, you could have clouds or birds or something? Might look neat with multiple layers, thicker clouds as you climb. I had not thought about that, but I agree with you. If we ever do make like a tower area, which seems kind of fun, we could make some clouds out there. I don't know to what extent that would be based on aproning, but it seems reasonable to do that as an apron, sure. How to link a third-party library like glfw3.lib. Any suggestions on where to read about it? I guess I want to say we covered this in Handmade Hero, actually, if you look for it, using the episode guide, but I guess I don't know that that was the case. Since we don't use libraries on the stream, you know, it's possible that I never really talked about it, but I thought I did at some point. Oh, whoops. I didn't want Handmade Con. So in here, you know, like, I don't know. I thought I did like a stream. It wasn't a main stream. It was like a chat stream. Oh, you know what though? Handmade chat. I want to say that I covered it on this stream here. This is the one I was thinking of. On how library linking works. I'm not 100% sure because we were talking about some other things, but I think that's what I would say. Rome. Environment is very sterile because all place static entities seem to be snapped to a grid. Maybe vary the offset randomly from the tile center. Also, the random height difference between floor tile could be severely reduced. Who made that flooring? It's a hazard. I'm not really super concerned with that stuff at the moment because that's going to be more like polish work as to how we want to make that stuff appear. But the world is supposed to look a little bit grid-like. Like that's the style because you specifically have to think about grid squares, as you'll kind of see as we go further into the game. So we really don't want it to look like a continuum. It's supposed to look kind of gridded, or at least cubey, right? Will you also replace xHand with dimx in the generate apron function? Yes, what I'd like to do is in the generate apron function, maybe and like I said, maybe we'll do this tomorrow. I'd like to make those two now share a like creation call for making the region and getting back the values. So we'll probably try to do that tomorrow. So they'll work similarly. Oh, have you ever used Sony SN Systems debugger for PlayStation 3? Someone on Handmade Network called it the best debugger they'd ever used, but didn't really go into detail about what it did right. Yeah, so I have used SN Systems. I don't remember if it was on the PlayStation 3, though. Probably wasn't on the PlayStation 3, actually. Because I believe SN Systems shipped debuggers for more platforms than just that one. I just fundamentally don't remember it. I just don't. I'm sorry. I mean, we definitely had those at Rad. We had a couple SN Systems things at Rad, I want to say. Over the years, but I don't remember them at all. It's been too long, and it wasn't a primary thing that I used. I didn't do very much PlayStation work, pretty much ever. It's never been a primary thing that I've been working on. So. have you had any unpleasant experience with the debugging on Linux? Yes, all experiences debugging on Linux are unpleasant. It's an unpleasant debugging environment. It's one of the reasons I don't use it. Was the old Dune 2 game made using GDI or OpenGL? Are you sure it was on Windows? I mean, it would have been direct draw if it was on Windows. So the answer is neither of those two things. But GDI more closely. However, I don't know. Are you sure that Dune 2 wasn't DOS? I don't know. I never had Dune 2, so I have no idea what it was. Yeah, Dune 2 is DOS, so it's using mode 13 probably. Let's take a look. Yes, thank you for the ad. Google Stadia. How many ads do they play now? I have YouTube Red on my actual machine, so I don't see this nonsense. Right. So here, if we assume this, if this is the if this is what we're talking about, like I said, I never had this game, so I have no idea. If this is the game we're talking about, I mean, just looking at it, I'm going to go out on a limb and just say it's probably DOS mode 13. So, you know, I probably don't really want to go into a lot of detail about what this is, but effectively what happened was on old PCs, when you were in, you know, when you were just booting into MS-DOS and the system BIOS was how you interface with the graphics driver for the, well, there's no graphics driver, with the graphics card. Effectively, you could create an interrupt, and I don't remember what the interrupt was. Let's see if they've got, yeah, okay. So it's int 10, which would be called this, which is 16, right? It's hexadecimal. So it's int 10h, which would be the 16, interrupt 16. When you execute that interrupt, the processor just looks to see if you set AL to 13 and A hex and AH to 0. And if you did, it puts you into, I want to say 320 by 240 by 8 bits. No, 320 by 200 by 8 bits. So it's 320 by 200 by 8 bits, and the 8 bits, so each pixel was a byte, and the byte was just an index into a palette. So you had 256 palette entries. Nobody used the default, so you would set them yourself to whatever the colors are that you wanted. And then you just wrote into the graphics memory aperture, which was, I want to say like OX A1000. That was probably monochrome. Oh, no, I'm right. There it is. It's A1000. And but it was double buffered, right? Wasn't it? Maybe it wasn't double buffered. Surprised I remembered the A1000, but turns out that's where it was. So I can't remember if it's double buffered or not. I'm guessing it's not, because if A1000 is the aperture and it's not really talking about an offset aperture here, then there would only have been one of them. So I'm guessing that it's just single buffered and you're writing directly to the screen. So you would have had to do an actual blit if you wanted to double buffer, I guess. Like I said, I don't really remember. Um, yeah, I remember this chain stuff. I'm sorry, I just don't remember all this stuff. But here it is. So it was double buffered. So you create two separate pages. You render to one of them, and then you patch. I guess you patch an address. So you wait till the V blank, you switch where it's reading from here, I guess. I'm gonna have to reread this stuff to because I don't remember. It's been too long. Sorry. Uh, but it looks like that's technically not mode 13, right? So yeah, I mean, I'm sorry I can't remember the exact details of how these things worked. Um, I want to say in so how. Here's a question for you. If we just go load like some code of mine from those days, which I didn't really do much programming on the PC, but like when I was in high school, I did like a little bit of DOS PC programming. So in the Handmade Fund bonus pack thing that you get if you contribute to the bonus fund, do I do any of that kind of thing here? So this is clearly just straight up like double buffering by writing to a back buffer and blitting forward. So that's just eating the CPU time to do that. So the answer was no, not in this code anyway, right? Whether or not I ever did anything like that, I just don't know. On the Amiga, you didn't do any of this stuff this way. This was completely PC only. So, I don't really know what is all this garbage. Those are all the particle effects stuff. So, Just trying to look to see if any of these other ones. So what's all this garbage? So it looks like maybe this was using some kind of a library. Xlib all. But I don't know what xlib all is. Probably something that we could dig up again. Easier said than done, huh? So this looks like a, yeah, like I was using some Modex graphics library, and I'm guessing that that would be in some kind of a root kind of file. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly where that would be in here. We could just download all this stuff and search for it. So you can see it's in that xlib.h. Is there a .c for that anywhere? I don't know. Looks like maybe it's just a lib. It's just in the lib. I mean, we could dump the lib, and then it probably wouldn't be too hard to look at the actual code in there, though, because we're talking about just some basic calls to set up stuff. They're going to look pretty straightforward, even in assembly. But yeah. So I don't know. Like, the other thing we could try to do is find. I'm kind of interested to know, like, if I could find the original source code to this library. Like, I don't know if it includes the source. It looks like it does. There's a bunch of ASM files there. Assuming that was in ASM. Right? So yeah, the basic xlib stuff, I don't know where it gets implemented, but we could certainly try to find out. So if I unpack this dude, then in here we should be able to open one of these things up and see. I don't know what these ink files. Oh, no, that's just well, oh, but it's got source. I don't know why it's called an ink file then. Can we search within the text here for double? This looks good. So, yeah. So it looks like what we're doing here is we're saying if we're only double buffer, we don't have to do this, which is fine. So assuming that we end up in here, we load and we swap the hidden page offset with the visible page offset. And I guess I'm just not sure how that helps us. If that's some kind of an actual register that the graphics card was looking for, it's not a register, but a memory location. Is that defined up here somewhere? Because here's set double buffer. Yeah, I mean, it looks like all you had to do for that part of the double buffering is looks like you had to arrange them properly. So you had to make sure that they were, like you can see here, they're computing like an offset that is designed to line these two things up in a particular way, right? And of course, there's all, because there's all these restrictions about what the graphics card isn't able to do in those days, right? So you had to create the correct sort of like resolution and arrangement of these screens. But it seems like anyway that after that, when you wait for the vertical refresh, you literally just write to you just take a particular memory location that the graphics card has mapped, I guess, and you just write the offset of the page into that, I guess. Because that's all I see happening here. Like, I don't see anything else. So it seems like that's all you really needed to do. Maybe. Let's see. Let's see here where we're at. So I don't know if there's any other questions I need to take at the moment. Avarishu, thank you for confirming the DOS VGA stuff. Yeah, it was okay. So was it Mode Y? What it was called? Okay, maybe mode X is when you do unchained, so you can get the double buffering. I forget all these terms. It really wasn't something I did much work with ever, so it just wasn't it's not my area of expertise. But it seems like I remember most of it, just not very well. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you, everyone, for joining me for an episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you, as always. If you want to follow along the series at home, you can always pre-order the game on handmadehero.org. And it comes with the source code, so you can follow along with it at home. We will be back tomorrow to play around with the apron stuff and just make sure that that stuff is solid. And then we can move on to whatever the next order of business is on the list of things that I talked about. Maybe we'll start to work on the collision side of things, because I would like that to get a little bit more straightforward. And we also want to make sure that the aprons work properly over rooms. So we just want to clean that stuff up. We did most of the stuff today, but we just want to sort of make that all brushed up and nice. And then we can talk about starting whatever it is we want to start on next in our list of things. Probably don't want to quite do lighting yet, because that's going to be a little bit more of an in-depth thing to finish that up. But we may want to just go ahead and start working on the ground cover stuff, would be another example. So collision detection and ground cover are probably two things we want to look at. And then maybe we'll move on to lighting after that. That's about it for today. Hope to see you back here tomorrow. Till then, have fun programming, and I will see everyone on the internet. Take it easy, everybody.